Okay, welcome to the review. So I've got quite a bit of technology set up in the rooms. There's actually cords drug all over the place, and if I could turn you around, you'd see like there's cameras balanced on desks and stuff like that. But like I said before, feel free to stop me, ask me questions if you want to type them into me, or if you just want to talk in. We'll do the best we can here with this. This unit is more complicated than any unit we've done so far. So we're talking about photosynthesis and respiration, which are kind of two sides of a coin. And we're going to dive in with photosynthesis. But like I said, feel free to stop me, or if there's something you can't see because I've got the screen tilted funny, let me know. We're going to start with photosynthesis. Or if you guys can't hear me, please let me know. So let's just take a quick look here at the equation for photosynthesis. I need something to point with. So what I'm going to try and do for you guys is I'm going to try and sum up the entire unit, basically everything that might be on the test, in just a couple of simple drawings. Hopefully it'll make more sense. Now, keep in mind one thing. I am super duper oversimplifying this stuff. I've almost simplified it to the point where it's not even photosynthesis or respiration anymore. But it'll make it way easier to understand, because basically all you're going to see is the steps to the process and what goes in and what comes out, which is mostly what the test is over, okay? So let's look at the equation first. We have this thing called photosynthesis, and as you know, plants do that. Humans don't, animals don't do photosynthesis. This is a way for a plant to store up energy from the sunlight. So take actual sunlight energy and convert it into a biological chemical energy that organisms can use. And plants are the base of the food chain. They start everything because of the fact that they can pull this off. So the equation for this, which I really simplified here, I put CO2, that's carbon dioxide. Remember, that comes out of the air, so plants are taking this from the air, plus water, H2O, which plants are taking up through their roots. They need sunlight to do this. Okay, so these are the reactants, and we're going to produce, through this chemical reaction with sunlight, glucose, which is sugar, and oxygen, which is going to be the waste product that they're going to get rid of. And that's convenient for us because we really like this stuff. We use that stuff. So this is photosynthesis. Let me show you really quick here. This is the equation right here for what's called cellular respiration. So plants do photosynthesis, we cannot. We do cellular respiration, but plants do this as well. So plants have to do this. This is storing the energy from the sun, this is burning it. So not only us, but also plants and everything else that's alive has to be able to use the energy. So we're all going to do respiration. And you've probably heard the word respiration before. You think of it in terms of like your breathing or something like that, because oxygen's an essential part of this process. If you think about what happens when you light a fire, which is really similar to, you need oxygen to light a fire, right? And you also need something to burn. So we're going to use oxygen, and we're going to burn glucose. We're going to do it in very slow steps, so we don't release all the energy at once. We don't want to start a fire inside of ourselves, right? So we're going to release all the energy slowly through a whole series of steps. But what I want you to see is that these are mirror images. So to do photosynthesis, you need carbon dioxide and water, okay? The products, what's going to come out of respiration, is carbon dioxide and water. We're after the energy, okay? But these are the waste products. The waste products of this one are the start products of this one. And the products of this one, the sugar and the oxygen, are the start products of this one. And glucose, the chemical formula, is C6H12O6. You'll probably see that on the test, but you can always, of course, look it up. That's 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens for a glucose molecule to make sugar. Okay, this is going to kind of be important, so we're going to talk about what happens to those carbons and where they go. So I'm going to get rid of this again, but I wanted you to see that this is the exact reverse of this. So one provides what the other needs. Okay, let's delve into the nitty-gritty here. So this is photosynthesis, and photosynthesis happens in a very, very important organelle inside of a cell. So if you think of a cell, the plant cell is much bigger than this piece of paper. It's bigger than this wall compared to how big I drew this thing. This is just a chloroplast. So the chloroplast is the green thing inside the plant leaf, inside the plant cells. Okay, it contains the pigment, the coloration called chlorophyll, and that's what makes the plant green, right? What a chloroplast looks like is kind of like a little gumdrop, and I made this one and I cut it open so we could see inside, but really it would look like a three-dimensional flattened sort of gumdrop. And each cell inside of a plant's leaf, if it's the right type of cell, has loads of these things, not just one or two. There's lots and lots of them, and this is where the magic of photosynthesis happens. So let's dive into a chloroplast. A chloroplast is like a miniature cell inside of the bigger cell. Now, in fact, these things probably evolved separately on their own and became part of plant cells. That's a whole nother story. We kind of talked about it a little bit before. So there are two sets of reactions that happen in the chloroplast. One is called the light reactions, or the light-dependent reactions, and the other one is called the dark reactions. So don't get confused here, because the dark reactions can happen in the light as well. It's just they don't need the light, okay? Sometimes we call them the light-independent reactions, because they don't have to have light to occur, but these need light. And what I did, even though both reactions are happening everywhere, is I divided the chloroplast with this dashed line here to kind of pretend like this was only happening over here and this was happening over here, just so we could see the difference, okay? So let's start where the whole process starts, with sunlight. So sunlight enters the leaf, and the leaf doesn't use every color of sunlight. So that's going to be something you want to know for the test. So you guys all know that leaves are green, right? Well, they're only green because they don't use green light. They reflect the green light back out. The colors they're actually using are the reds and the blues, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? So we could do an experiment where we set up different wavelengths of light, different colors, and tried to see which ones the plants could use to do photosynthesis, right? So they're not using the green light. The green light's it's just getting reflected off. That's why they look green. So light comes in, and it's going to hit a very specific spot inside of the chloroplast, okay? It's called thylakoid. Okay? And thylakoid looks like little stacks of pancakes, and there's lots and lots of these thylakoid stacks inside of a chloroplast. I just drew one little stack here. The stuff it's going to hit inside the thylakoid discs here is called chlorophyll, and that's the color, or sometimes we say the pigment. It's the coloring, and that's the stuff that actually absorbs the energy and starts to excite electrons. This whole process is kind of based on electricity, the movement of electrons, just like in the wires in your house. So we're going to store up energy using electrons to move it around. Now, to do this first part, the light reactions, you're going to need water, okay? So the plant needs water for this step, and it's going to give off oxygen. So the waste product is going to be oxygen. Now, the reason for the oxygen thing is because the light reactions are going to they're going to split something known as hydrolysis. They're going to split this water molecule, and the oxygen's not used. The plant's after the two hydrogens. So those two hydrogens are going to go on to the next step. Okay, so you could think of this whole light reactions, it's splitting water, it's going to get rid of oxygen, okay, and it's going to use the hydrogens. Okay? Where do the hydrogens come into play? So this process is going to make two other things. It's going to make ATP, which you should be familiar with so far. That's adenosine triphosphate. That is the energy currency of the cell. So if we're talking about the money, this is the energy money for the cell. This is the actual usable stuff. Like everything else is kind of storing it. This stuff is directly usable. So ATP, and it's going to create this electron carrier, E negative's electron, NADPH. Okay, you're going to see a bunch of these. FADH, NADP, NADPH. If you see a string of funny letters that you don't recognize, that's not like ATP or something, or ADP, it's an electron carrier. Okay, all these processes, you're going to see them again in respiration. They use these carriers to move electrons around. So, hydrogen, hydrogen, right? We're taking these hydrogens, we're going to make this whole process go. These things go over to the next cycle, which is the dark reactions, also known as the light-independent reactions. Can they happen in the daytime? Yeah, they just don't need light. Sometimes we call this the Kelvin cycle, after the guy Melvin Kelvin who discovered it. So it's sometimes referred to as the Kelvin cycle. I wrote that here because you'll probably see that on the test as well. So the next step, which doesn't need light, is going to need something else. It's going to need carbon dioxide. Okay? That's in the air. Like, I'm making it right now by breathing and talking. I'm making carbon dioxide, and plants could use that. So they bring it in through their leaves, these special openings in their leaves, and what they're going to do, and I kind of just drew a little thing like there's a cycle going here and poof, all this stuff happens, but it's really pretty complex. This cycle runs and it uses carbon dioxide and it strings together the carbons out of this, okay, to make C6H12O6, the sugar. It's going to spit out sugar when it's done. So it's taking the carbons from this to make sugars. So when this cycle moves through, it's going to deplete both of these. It's going to use them. In their depleted forms, ATP, triphosphate, 3 phosphates, becomes ADP, diphosphates. Okay? NADPH becomes NADP+. Okay? So then these guys go back over here to get recharged, and then they come back into the cycle again. Cool. It's not too complex when we look at it like this. But this step here, the light reactions, will be a question on the test, happen in the thylakoid discs. THYLAKOID. Okay? And it's the chlorophyll pigment that's absorbing the light. These reactions over here, which I just kind of drew over here, happen in something called the stroma. STROMA. And all that is the liquid in the chloroplast. It's like the cytoplasm for the chloroplast. It's just the liquid in here. Okay? So this is happening like all over the place in here. And these discs are everywhere too. I just divided it for you. Okay, whew, I just threw a lot at you. Are there any huge questions about that? No? Okay, feel free to stop me if there's something that doesn't make sense. That's essentially photosynthesis. Let's dive in just a little closer with these two steps a little bit here, because I know you've seen Mr. Chastain went into more detail, and I know you've seen more detail on these than what I just gave you. But really for the test, mostly focus on this here. This is the main part, okay? But let's just go into a little bit more detail so you kind of know what we're talking about. So the light-dependent reactions that are happening here, I went ahead and drew them out a little bit more. Yeah, right? And I'm still simplifying this. So this is by no means an exact representation of what's going on, but it'll give you an idea of what's happening in the light-dependent reactions. So there's a chloroplast, and the sunlight's hitting the little discs, the thylakoid. Okay? There's actually 2 electron transport chains where electrons kind of fall down this ladder and release their energy. And as they release their energy, they make this ATP. Okay? And that's going to go over to the Kelvin cycle, okay, the light-independent reactions. Okay? At the end of this cycle here, we're going to split water. It's called photolysis. So water is going to split, and we're going to out the oxygen, okay? But the hydrogens here, we're going to take those in the electrons to make NADPH, which is the carrier. So that's where that energy comes from. Really, that's nothing. I gave you nothing new there. All I did was try to show you a little bit more as to what's going on. There's 2 chains that happen to those electrons that the sunlight energizes out of the chlorophyll. So this stuff gets real energized when the electrons start to move, just like electricity. and they go through a series of steps and they make this ATP. Okay? Now if you're wondering how ATP gets made, let me go into a little more detail on that. So, zoom in there. Okay. So ATP, just get over here. The molecule ATP has three parts to it. Okay, it's got an adenine, which is the base. I just drew it here as this little rings. Okay, it's got a sugar called ribose on it, which is attached to it here, and then there's three phosphate groups, and I just wrote little P's here and put little circles, and these things have bonds that are holding them together. So when we talk about using energy, what happens when the cell needs to use ATP, it will release this last bond right here. It breaks this bond, and this phosphate goes shooting off almost like a bullet. And it can use this to do work inside the cell, like to spin something or make something happen. To recharge this, because after you remove one, it's no longer ATP, it becomes a DP, diphosphate. So once that happens, you gotta cram another one of these on here. So there's a process right here, these electron transport chains, of sticking new ones on so we can recharge the energy. Okay, this is ATP. You'll get asked on the test what three parts there are: an adenine, a ribose, and then three phosphate groups. When you use it, it becomes ADP, and there's only two phosphates. Okay. Now, this is a really bad drawing, but we're going to talk about what's happening here in cellular respiration in a second. But when you're making ATP, one thing that happens is these hydrogens can move through something called ATP synthase. It's like a little molecule that spans a membrane, this little protein, and it spins around and it takes ADP and makes ATP. Don't get too hung up in that, but the word ATP synthase is the protein that actually makes ATP in the mitochondria. Okay. Whew. Out. Okay, let's dive a little bit deeper into this thing right here. Okay, this is, like I said, this is going to be more information than you maybe need for the test, but if it makes it make a little bit more sense, I want to explain it some. Okay, so we just talked about this, the electron transport chains. Okay, the oxygen that's going to come out of this, the water we need to split. Okay, the NADPH electron carriers, the ATP goes into the Kelvin cycle. When they're depleted, they go back and get recharged. In the stroma, this cycle is going to look like this. It's like a starry night. There we go. Okay, so I found this great picture here on the Khan Academy because I was trying to draw one, and I was doing a really terrible job at it, so I finally just got a picture off the internet. So this right here is showing you that cycle, okay? So, oops, I got the wrong thing here, didn't I? Okay. No, there we go, it is right, there we go. Okay, so what happens here is, remember the carbon dioxide, the CO2 that the plant needs, okay? It goes through a series of steps, three big ones here: carbon fixation, reduction, and regeneration, to create sugar, because the whole point is to make the sugar. Okay, so you've seen some of these words on some of the questions on the quizzes, and I just kind of wanted to throw them out there a little bit. Okay, so what happens is you actually need three carbon dioxide molecules to make this cycle run, the Kelvin. Okay? You're going to need three of these carbons to do it. Okay, so you take three of those, you start with something called RUBP, which is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbon chain, and we need to have, when we get done, We need to make a glucose, which is C6. It's going to have 6 carbons. It's the whole crazy series of processes. Okay? So what's going to happen with RUBP is another molecule is going to make this work. It's the catalyst called rubisco. It's going to take a carbon from CO2 and it's going to stick it on there. So now we've got 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? Immediately, this thing splits in half. And it makes these other 2 things called PGA. Okay, there's 2 of those. Now remember, we had 3 of these to start with. Okay, so we're going to now have 6 of these because we split 3 of these in half. There's going to be 6 of these things. That's why there's a 6 there. We take some energy. We use some NADPH. Okay, and this stuff converts into something called G3P, which you've probably seen. Okay. One of these goes on to make glucose, the sugar, but remember I had 6 here, so there's 5 still of them around, 5 of these things. So what happens to those 5 is they go back over here to get recycled to become the RUBP. And then this whole thing just spins round and round and round. Don't get too hung up on that. I know that's a lot of information, okay? I know it's pretty complicated and this quite a bit. All you gotta really remember is it's the Kelvin cycle. Takes in carbon dioxide, it's going to spit out glucose. Okay? But now you can see like it's a really complicated process, and even that's a simplification of what's going on. Okay? We're fixing carbon from the air to make sugar. Okay? Pop back over. Okay, so what I just showed you was the nitty-gritty of what's going on in here. Once more, again, with photosynthesis, okay, we have the light reactions. It hits the chlorophyll in these thylakoid discs. Water gets split, releasing oxygen. The hydrogens get used because we're going to make NADPH, which is going to carry electrons, and ATP, which is the energy to run the old Kelvin cycle. Which this magic here just happens. Carbon dioxide, C, is stuck together to make C6H12O6, which is sugar. These are the dark reactions. They happen in the stroma. These guys go back to get recycled again. Okay? Not too complicated when you look at that part. Okay, next step. Whew. Okay. I know it's a lot. Take a breath. It's complicated stuff. If you can understand these 2 diagrams, essentially, the last one and this one, you've pretty much got the whole text. Okay? So this right here is cell respiration. Go get that. Still got the bells going. Cell respiration. So this right here, what's going on, is we're going to burn the energy that photosynthesis stored. So photosynthesis stored it, we're going to burn it now. We're going to use it. Plants do this, animals do this, all life has to do this or it's got no energy. Okay? So what goes in? Oxygen, we know we have to breathe that in. Sugar, we get that because we eat it. We either kill a plant and eat a plant, or we kill an animal and eat an animal because the animal ate a plant. But it all comes from the plants to start with, right? This is the energy from the sun. There's 6 carbons in each of these. When we're done, we're going to exhale carbon dioxide. We know that. We're going to give off water. If you breathe on some glass, you notice that some water vapor comes out, right? The moisture. And then we're going to get energy, ATP, which is energy currency that we can use. We can use it to walk around, to do stuff, to talk. Now there's 3 steps. 1, 2, 3. And I'm sorry if my orange highlighter kind of ruined this a little bit. I'll try and spell it for you here, okay? So there's only 2 locations where this happens. Step 1 happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. So remember the cell again. We don't have, if it's an animal cell, we don't have chloroplasts. If it's a plant cell, it does. But also inside these cells are these little bean-shaped things called mitochondria. So picture this is a whole big giant cell, and within that cell is another wee little cell. And it's called a mighty mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. where the energy is actually made, okay, or released maybe we should say. We're gonna make ATP energy. The first step to this whole process is called glycolysis, okay? Remember hydrolysis, we were hydro breaking water? Well, glycolysis is lysing or breaking glucose, sugar. Glycolysis. We're gonna break sugar down. We started with this, and we're gonna bust it in half. Now to do this process, it's gonna happen not in the mitochondria, but out in the liquid called the cytoplasm, which I wrote out here. It's gonna happen in the cytoplasm of the cell. So, real brief, and this is super duper shrunk down here. We take a sugar, 1 glucose. How many carbons are in a glucose? 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we need to break this in half. So, to get some energy, we've got to burn some. We've got to burn some to earn some. So it's going to take 2 ATPs to bust this thing, okay, to lyse it. But when you do lyse it, when you do cut it, you release 4. That's good, we gained some. So net gain was 2, right? So if we took 4, okay, and then we got 2 out of it, or sorry, if we took 2 and we got 4 out of it, then we gained 2 total. That makes sense, right? So we're gonna cut this in half. We gain 2 ATP. Well, 2 ATP is like whoop-de-doo-dah. I can't even take a step. Like I'd be dead. You need more than 2 ATP. So we're gonna see how this works out. What we're really after is this stuff called pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid. You're gonna get 2 because there are 3 carbons. 1, 2, 3, and then the other one, 1, 2, 3. So all we did was split this guy in half, and that's why we got 2. And this name for this stuff is just called pyruvic acid. And that's what the cell is after. Okay, because this stuff is gonna go on to the next step. Step 2, that happens in the mighty mitochondria. So 2 and 3 both happen in the mitochondria. The mitochondria is like this bean sort of shaped thing. And there's lots of them, like in your muscles, there's lots and lots of these things. And they have this folded membrane inside of them. And a lot of the reactions happen in this folded membrane. The first step is called the Krebs cycle. Krebs. I know it's hard to read there. It's too bad that my highlighter killed it. Krebs cycle, Krebs cycle, like a crab. Okay, I know that sounds a lot like Kelvin, but Kelvin is the plant thing, the photosynthesis, and Krebs, like crabs, is the thing that plants and animals do. So these 2 go in, and again, I just drew a magic here, okay? Because I didn't want to overwhelm you with all the stuff going on, like I just showed you in the Kelvin cycle, and I'm not gonna hit you with all this stuff, okay? But let's look at what goes in, what goes out. The 2 pyruvics go in, so 2 chains of 3 carbons each, okay? And we're gonna spit out some ATP. Oh, whoop-de-doo-dah, another 2. So how much total do we have now? 2 plus 2 of those is 4, so we got 4 now. And we're gonna get rid of some carbon dioxide here. So there's why you gotta breathe that stuff out, the Krebs cycle. Okay, so this guy runs 2 ATP plus the other 2, that's 4, whoop-de-doo-dah. But really what the Krebs cycle is after is to make electron carriers. And it's gonna make 2 of these. One's called NADH, and the other's called FADH. So if you see these H's and the D's, you've got an electron carrier. That's all you gotta remember. The electron carriers are gonna go on to the next step. This is the step where the money's at. This is step number 3 now. Step number 3 also happens in the mitochondria. In a different location across a membrane, what's gonna happen is we're gonna need some oxygen for this step. So you better breathe some in, some O2. And the reason you need oxygen is because it's the final electron acceptor. Okay, you've got all these electrons we're carrying, and we're gonna release a bunch of energy out of these electrons to make ATP. Something better be at the bottom of all these chains to collect the electrons when we're done, and that's oxygen. That's how we say it's the final electron acceptor. So oxygen's the key to this whole process. Okay, what are we going to release? Well, one of the waste products is going to be water. The other product is going to be 32 ATP. Bam, there's where the money is. So let's add them up, because I guarantee you it'll be a test question. You're going to make, from this whole thing, respiration, 32 plus 2, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. Remember, because we wasted 2. So total 36. But you make the most in the electron transport chain. So these electrons, like they did in the plant, will fall down these chains, okay, and then go through the membrane to spin ATP synthase, that little thing I showed you, and it will create all these ATPs that then you can go use as energy, okay? Whew, that is a heck of a lot. I threw a ton of stuff at you. Let me move out of the way a bit so you can see. Step 1, cytoplasm. Step 2, mitochondria, Krebs cycle. Step 3, mitochondria, electron transport chain, money. Okay, glycolysis, Krebs, electron transport. Like, that is literally the entire test, if you can understand that stuff. And I know it's complex. Let me show you just a couple other things here that will pop up on the test. So I wrote these 2 words down because you're going to need to know them. Aerobic and anaerobic. So you can think of aerobic, kind of sounds like air, because aerobic processes need oxygen. In which cycle needed oxygen? Respiration needs oxygen, right? Anaerobic or not aerobic, A-N-E-R-O-B-I-C, without oxygen, no O2, we can do something and gain a little bit limited amount of energy, limited amount of ATP without oxygen, and it's called fermentation. Some things just do this, like yeast. Yeast cells do fermentation, but we can do a type of fermentation as well. It's just that we can't survive on it for very long. Okay, and it's going to make our muscles really sore because it's going to make a whole bunch of lactic acid, because we do something called lactic acid fermentation. So let's take a quick look at what happens when you can't do respiration because there's no oxygen. You're running out, you're jogging really fast, when you're running out of oxygen, you can't get enough in there. So you've got to do something to make some energy, and it's called fermentation. Okay, so let's take a look at what fermentation looks like. Okay. Go. So this should look familiar. This is just glycolysis. Take a sugar. This happens in the cytoplasm, right? It's the first step before we can do respiration. Takes 2 ATP, you spit out 4, and what you do is you make these 2 pyruvic acids. I didn't draw them all in there, but 6 carbon, you made 2 3 carbons. If this can't go on to run through the rest of respiration in the mitochondria because there's no oxygen, it can go through a process called fermentation. And in humans, this is called lactic acid fermentation. And lactic acid, remember, is what makes your muscles sore. So what happens, and I just kind of drew all these arrows here to show you that it goes round and round. Don't get too caught up in all of the molecules and whatnot. Just know that lactic acid fermentation is a way for us to make some ATP. Where is it there? To keep making some ATP by running glycolysis. So we can keep this thing going if we can just keep recycling the materials. And we can do that for a while. And it's called lactic acid fermentation. It's what we can do when we don't have enough oxygen. Now, you can't live like that for very long, right? Everybody knows you need oxygen. Okay, I think we have gone over literally everything I could possibly talk about. Okay, I'll show you these 2 again. there's respiration, all the steps. Here's its mirror image, photosynthesis. Remember, plants have to do both of those, but animals like us can only do the respiration bit. Okay, how's that? Anybody have any questions? Can I help you with anything? I know that's pretty complicated stuff. No? Okay, well, I think we're going to end things there unless anybody has any questions. Feel free to contact me on It's Learning and ask away. I think there's a few activities to do today, but this should make all of that a whole lot easier, hopefully. And I hope it made sense to you guys. Anyway, you can look back at it. I'll post all this online for you if you need to look back at it for the test. All right, well, it's good seeing you guys. Hope you have a good one.